Jessica traced her finger along the rim of the paper cup, her third coffee since arriving at the Portland FBI field office. Across the metal table, Agent Sarah Winters watched the repetitive motion with practiced patience. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows that made the dark circles under Jessica's eyes look like bruises. "Let's start from the beginning," Agent Winters said, her voice gentle but firm. "Tell me about the day you arrived at Blackwood Forest." Jessica's finger stopped its circular path. "We got there around 4. Mike always said that was the perfect time to set up camp before sunset." Her voice caught on his name. Mike was always so precise about everything. The late September air had been crisp when they pulled into the trailhead parking lot. Mike consulted his GPS one last time before shouldering his pack. 3 miles to the spot I found," he said, grinning at Jessica. "It's perfect, completely isolated." The ranger station they'd passed had been closed, but a notice board warned of recent trail closures in the northern section. They were heading east, though, so Mike had merely photographed the map and moved on. Jessica remembered thinking how prepared they always were, how safe. The hike took longer than expected. Mike stopped frequently to photograph interesting fungi or unusual birds, adding to his nature collection. By the time they reached the small clearing, the sun was already dipping behind the Douglas firs. The clearing was indeed beautiful, a natural bowl surrounded by old-growth trees, with a small flat area ideal for their tent. They worked together with the efficiency of longtime camping partners, setting up their site as darkness crept in around them. The evening was normal at first, Jessica told Agent Winters, who was taking notes in a small black notebook. Mike built a fire. He loved telling ghost stories, always the same ones. She smiled faintly at the memory. Then, fearful, the smile vanished. The fire cast dancing shadows on the trees as Mike finished his story about the vanishing hitchhiker. Jessica rolled her eyes, having heard it countless times before, but she loved watching him tell it. The way his eyes lit up at the scary parts, how his hands moved animatedly in the firelight. The first unusual sound came just as they were banking the fire for the night. A sharp crack, like a branch breaking, but too loud for something natural. They both turned toward it, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Probably deer," Mike said, but his voice held a note of uncertainty Jessica had never heard before. Inside the tent, wrapped in their double sleeping bag, Jessica tried to focus on Mike's steady breathing instead of the forest sounds. But something felt different about these sounds. They weren't the usual nighttime forest noises she'd grown accustomed to over years of camping. These were deliberate, terrified. The first knock made them both stiffen. It came from a tree to their left, a hollow wooden sound like someone rapping their knuckles against the trunk. Before either could speak, another knock answered from the opposite direction. "Mike?" Jessica whispered, clutching his arm. "Shh!" He sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight. The knocking continued, creating a perimeter around their campsite. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, almost like communication. Jessica counted 7 distinct knocking points surrounding them. Then the tent became the focus. Something moved around it, brushing against the fabric. The touch was too high up to be an animal on 4 legs. Their battery-powered lantern cast shadows of something large moving past, but the shape made no sense to Jessica's terrified mind. The knocking grew louder, faster, more insistent. Jessica pressed her hands against her ears, but she couldn't block out the sound or Mike's ragged breathing beside her. Then, abruptly, silence fell. They lay there frozen for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The quiet was absolute. No wind in the trees, no nocturnal animals, nothing. "I need to look," Mike whispered finally. Jessica grabbed his arm. "No, please. Wait until morning. We need to know what it is." His voice was steady, trying to be reassuring. "I'll just take a quick look. Count to 30. I'll be right back." Before she could stop him, he was unzipping the tent. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the silence. Mike poked his head out, flashlight beams sweeping the darkness. "I don't see any." The scream that cut off his words would haunt Jessica's nightmares forever. There was a sound like something heavy being dragged through leaves, the flashlight beam swinging wildly before going dark. Mike's scream, turned liquid, then stopped. Jessica lay paralyzed in the sleeping bag, her mouth open in a silent scream of her own. Whatever was out there moved around the campsite for hours, but never touched the tent again. She didn't move until dawn broke, and voices of hikers filtering through the trees finally gave her the courage to emerge. The police found no signs of Mike? Agent Winters asked, though Jessica could tell from her tone that she already knew the answer. Jessica's voice was hollow, just marks on the trees, deep gouges too high up for a bear, and tracks that the rangers said couldn't be identified. She leaned forward suddenly. But you know what it was, don't you? There have been others. Agent Winters closed her notebook carefully. What makes you say that? The way you've been taking notes. You're not writing down my story, you're checking it against something you already know. A long moment passed between them. Finally, Agent Winters spoke, her voice careful. The Blackwood Forest area has a long history, some of it classified. She stood, smoothing her dark suit. A trauma counselor will be in shortly to speak with you. Try to get some rest. At the door, the agent paused. One last question. The knocking pattern you mentioned. Was it 3 short knocks, followed by 2 long ones? Jessica felt her blood run cold. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Agent Winters said softly. That's all we needed to know. As the door clicked shut behind the agent, Jessica stared at her reflection in the two-way mirror, wondering what else was staring back.